Dames en heren, ladies and gentlemen, iets stiller. Could you all please come and sit down? And if possible, as much as possible in the front rows, because that's better, you know, for the people who are watching us online, then they see the whole audience. So, dear participants here in this beautiful church room, and for those who are following online, wherever you are, welcome to this second keynote lecture of the International Conference of the PTHU. It is my great pleasure and a great honor for me and for the PTHU to be able to introduce Rabbi Awraham Soetendorp. For most attendants from the Netherlands, Rabbi Soetendorp will not need to be introduced. And also for several international attendants, he will be a familiar speaker. Among other things, Awraham Soetendorp is a Reform rabbi. For many years, the chief rabbi of the liberal Jewish community of The Hague, and president of the European region of the World Union of Progressive Judaism. But besides Jewishly, he always has been politically active as a politician himself, but also as an advisor to many political leaders in the Netherlands and in the world. His political influence is always geared towards making peace and healing the world in all senses, spiritually, ecologically. You will hear more about this tonight, I think. In the past years, Awraham Soetendorp has been active in the Council of Conscience, together with other famous leaders of world religions and religious influencers such as Karen Armstrong. And as such, he has strong opinions about the way the world should cope with all the crises that are coming upon us in these days. Rabbi Soetendorp is a renowned and much demanded speaker, and we are very happy and proud that he agreed to address us tonight. He told me that he has youth memories of this church, which is close to the Vossius Gymnasium, the high school that he attended, and that he was on this stage in the theater play, is that correct? Many years ago. He has been on many much bigger stages since that time, but his message always remains one of humbleness and cooperation and truth. He is a prophetic voice, as we will soon experience. I invite you to listen and to experience Rabbi Soetendorp's address, and I hope that we will afterwards be able to be prepared to further amplify the whisper of truth that he will instill in us. The floor is yours.
Bruchim Habaim. In Hebrew, it is out of Psalm 118. Blessed are you who have come. And I'm reflecting at the beginning that you are also here in a city that is called Makom, the place. It was the place of refuge for the children who in the end of the 15th century had to flee Spain and Portugal and were roaming around Europe. Many of them in North Africa and also in Turkey, which has a very good history in accepting Jews. And then here in Amsterdam, found their way. And negotiating good life in times of crisis brings to me the past as it brings to me the present and the future. Because negotiating good life for the refugees then meant also drawing spiritual sustenance from the Jewish tradition, starting every day with Moneh modea lefanecha. I am grateful to you, God, shechzachta nishmati bi, that you have returned my soul to me. And a recognition of thankfulness. And then in the richness of the city, if you look nowadays, you see still the Esnoga, the Portuguese synagogue, exulting, high and pronounced, built in 1675 with the expectation of Messianic time. It was built on the condition that when the Messiah would come, the stones would be removed to Jerusalem. And in the meantime, they rested in Jerusalem of the West, as Amsterdam was also called to them. And in the neighborhood of the synagogue, there is now a wall of names. Only half a year ago, through the arduous and visionary initiative of the Auschwitz Committee and Jacques Gishaver, the chairman, there are inscribed in stone 102,000 names of Jews who were transported from this country and killed, and hundreds Roma and Sinti who went the same way. And this horror, which is still with us, the death in Mokum, the emptiness in Mokum, and in the middle, there is the dock worker. And that is a man standing there, a dock worker, fragile and powerful, with his hands stretched. And my dear father of blessed memory, who in 41, when the February strike started, and the dock worker is the symbol of that strike, unique in Europe, the only massive strike of people against the persecution of the Jews. My father wrote, there he stands. He says, I've put up my sleeves. The man who never prayed in a church, let alone in a synagogue, but his curse was the biggest prayer. Ed Fontaine, of blessed memory, the mayor of this town, and also a hidden Jew, said often, those who resisted were not the majority. Some say they were few, but thank God they were there. Navigating good life in times of crisis. I very much appreciated and enjoyed the speech of Aruna today, which I watched from afar, because I have still to be a little bit far. And my wife is bravely fighting illness. But I realized when I listened to Aruna, sorry, I had to get used to the fact that I'm standing. This is a church. I always have difficulties in these constrained spaces. I don't know. But if I go there, then people afar would not see me, so I stay. When I listened to Aruna, I felt against India, the place that I love in my travels. And I thought of Rishikesh and Puchi Swami and Sattvi and the jiva that we erected together the Global Interfaith Wash Alliance that is concerned with health and concerned of defecating, not having a toilet in so many places. Millions and millions of people who are still suffering illnesses because of lack of sanitation. And I wanted to share with Aruna, but I'll share with you how one of the most spiritual moments I have experienced was not far from the place in Rishikesh. It was still in Rishikesh, where we inaugurated a block of toilets. And in the Jewish tradition, we know the importance of toilets, because in the morning prayers, immediately at the beginning, there is a prayer that you say in thankfulness when you have been to the toilet and your bodily openings and closures are intact. And I realized also when I saw Aruna and I was with her in this confrontation with Corona and with the virus, that I missed her and I missed so many people, and that traveling in the world has become important to me, not because the traveling itself, but because the embrace of people, because the necessity to live together as a community of human beings. When I started my life, it was deep darkness and no light. And there was a whisper. May 43. The transportation, as it is called, of Jews was taking place meticulously, according to rules and regulations, and there were razzias. At that moment, the end of May, they came also to our home, broke the door, stood in front of my parents, suitcases ready, too late. One didn't want to leave because they were still hoping somehow the resistance would find a place also for a baby. The officer approached the cradle and looked in my eyes, 3 months old. A mystery. He was quietly there for a moment, gazing in my eyes. And then he said, "Schade, dass ihr ein Jude ist." What a pity that this is a Jewish child. And my father immediately retorted, happy he is that he is a Jewish child, because whatever will happen to him, he will never become a son of murderers. And the shouting and screaming of the man, the officer, and those who assisted him, and slapping my father and screaming, "You are so dirty, we can't touch you now, we'll come back tomorrow." My father told me this story once. And added, never forget, there were tears in the eyes of the SS man. And those tears have saved our lives. Incredible. One lesson. When the gaze of a baby can still penetrate into a heart, even if this heart is filled with hatred and indoctrination, and the baby becomes a potential danger in the future. When the gaze of the baby can still penetrate in this darkness and move the heart. Nothing is lost. And everything is possible. And then they found a place for me, alone, and for my parents alone. And I was enveloped in a place in the arms of a German-born woman who wanted in her life to make sure that she would never give in to the hatred that occupied her beloved country. And my foster father, they saved my life. He gave his life when the last grenades came also on our house, and he covered me with his body. It's taken me a long, long time to be able to speak about it in this way as I speak now, without breaking down. But I have to continue, because without my remembrance, there is no lesson to be taken. And the lesson is that in the human psyche, in the human being, there is a potential to come out of comfort, to cross the frontier of fear, to safeguard people who don't belong to your family, to your faith, to your tribe. And those two lessons are essential for navigating good life, especially in times of crisis that we are facing now. I was so lucky to live and to be reunited with their families. In my life, I have tried to learn the other lesson, that people like Orliner, in his book, The Altruistic Personality, and Irvin Schaub and others have concluded that when a people or people are being taken in the midst of a town, a country, a continent, there are three groups that are forming, if you speak in generalities. Where is the majority? The majority is on the pavement. The majority tries to survive the crisis, take care of their own families. They're not bad. They're not indifferent, but they choose first for safety. And they look at the other side, closing the doors. A minority is collaborating with the oppressor. And a minority is prepared to stretch out the hand. You know, I have walked the streets of Kiev once, towards the memorial of Babi Yar, where 33,000 Jews had been killed in 2 days and 2 nights. I had always thought, like Elie Wiesel, who writes about it, had thought, that it would be outside of the city, in a wood, that you could not hear anything. But the streets were full of people, where the majority lived, who closed the doors. And I'm thinking now of Kiev today, besieged in a senseless war, waged because of a phantom, of an imperialism. What is in the heart of the Pharaoh of today? Is his heart able to withstand the gaze of a baby and more babies? The one embracing line is the line that I have tried to be nourished by. That there is not a division between good and bad, but between right and right. But people lose their way and feel threatened, and then start to do evil things. With Anne Frank, I, who have always remained that baby, I say that man, human being, man and woman, is basically good. The goodness survives. Navigating good life. When I choose to be somewhere, of course it's my synagogue, where I've been nourished also by a calendar of festivals and commemorations. And there is a balance between the two. But the balance in Jewish life should always be towards hope and not towards tragedy. But after the Shoah, the destruction of my birth and the death of 6 million, in this destruction, the balance has been destroyed. And so the balance was more towards the tragedy, towards the survival, and not able to reach the good life. And I followed my father, and seeing how this community was struggling, the remnants, and how together they somehow tried to find the balance again. And I tried as a rabbi, unable often, but still, to redress the balance. But it was never only for the Jewish people. We are always humans. Tonight, suddenly I couldn't sleep, thinking about the title, thinking about the responsibility of the group that I belong to, the interfaith community that you belong to. The ones who dream of a future. Aruna speaks about God's will. And the interfaith community is so important because we believe that 70 to 80% of all humanity has a sense of the transcendent, has a sense of God in all his and her names. Why can't we change this world? Why can't we fight for this future? And so tonight, I suddenly realized that my theme, the whisper of truth, is also my origin. I am here because a whisper of truth between my mother and my father, against all odds, labarot hakol, despite everything, bishut hakol, thanks to everything. And you all are. And we all are. And we are human beings. We believe in the scripture, the way it describes our origin, that we are the image of God. And destroying one soul is destroying the world. And destroying and saving one is saving the whole of society. So in our belief, there is this sacredness of human life. And the interfaith community has been able to preserve that. The question is, how do we move forward? I have had many teachers, and some of the teachers I will not mention, except to say that one of them was Moshe Stitzer, a member of the congregation, who lost everything. And once said to me, I cannot pray anymore, knowing my wife and children and everybody else died and was killed. And I said to him, Moshe, why do you come so often to the synagogue? Why do you sing? And he said, you know something? It's very difficult, often impossible, to live with God. But you know what is more difficult? To live without him. And with him, immediately, I think about somebody else who symbolized for all of us the search for freedom, and that is Martin Luther King. It was my fortune to meet him. I was there in the United States in '68, and there in February '68, I joined the people who fought or protested against the war in Vietnam. And we were not allowed to speak on Arlington Cemetery, which was the cemetery for the people who died also in Vietnam. So we went to a church, and in the church spoke Martin Luther King. He spoke about the river of justice that will stay flowing. And then he said, I don't know to whom he mentioned it, not to us who were sitting there, but still, you tried to kill me by putting me in a corner and saying I'm only for the blacks, but I'm also for the white. That I'm always only for the poor, but I'm always also for those who struggle with their wealth. Don't put me in the corner and kill me. He spoke, and this prophetic voice came into my heart, and I didn't know what to do. This was so true, and then suddenly I realized that I lost something. A small book, a book of poems written by people who lived in the trenches of the First World War, in English, in French, in German. And this was without a flag. And I had this book. It was dear to me because it kept me strong in the search for peace. Because if everybody had listened to those soldiers and those poems, maybe the war would never have happened again. And in my search for this book, I went through the church, and I went to rooms, and I went to a big room, and suddenly I saw all kinds of books and papers, and I knew this is futile, completely futile, but I was drawn to a wall, and the wall was with bookcases, and there were some some books there thrown away, and I said, maybe by chance somebody put it there or found it. And I went on my knees, and I was just in search of the impossible when the door opened, and there Martin Luther King came in. Suddenly, he stopped. He looked at me. He said, "You must have lost something, young man." And I stupidly, this was Martin Luther King. I said, "Yes, a book of poems." And he said, "Let me try to help you." And he went on his knees. In this moment of the whisper, he picked up a book and said, "Is it green? Is it blue? Is it white?" And I said, no, a little bit bluish. Not this one. And I shouted in myself, and I said, "Why do I speak about a book? I can ask everything. I am together with the prophet." And then it continued and continued till at the end we stood up, and he said, "I'm so sorry that we haven't been able to find it." And I mumbled something of thankfulness, "Sir." And he left. And 2 months later, he was killed. And I went to the ghetto of Cincinnati, to give my sympathy. And one looked at me, "What are you doing here, whitey?" And I was insulted, and then suddenly I thought, why am I insulted? There's not a big sign on me that says, "I'm a Jew, I'm a Jewish child, I was also rescued, I want to be with you." No, my white skin, my naked face. And in the course of the years, I realized what the biggest lesson was. A real leader, a great leader, but also a small leader, has the capacity to give space to you in his or her dream. He gave me space in his dream. And now, so many years later, I'm sharing a story that nobody knows except the young man who searched for a book. And all these are whispers of truth, which together can be powerful. I'm frank with you. I said it to the organizers when the war started in Ukraine, and as the days came by, that I was thinking of one of the first interfaith conferences that I attended. That was in Louvain, in Belgium. And we were in that conference room. It was the beginning of a conference, and there were people from all different parts of the world. It was the beginning of the Religions for Peace. And I was sitting there, and I was listening to some of the prayers and the music. And I was aware even then of the suffering in the world, the hunger. There was a hunger in India that really the clocks were sounding in all the churches, and there were collections of money, and it was not enough. And I was sitting there, and I thought to myself, what happens if I stand up and I say, it's not enough what we are doing. Let us stay here and fast and not leave this room till the powers that be finally decide to share of their wealth and their bread. And I looked around me, and I didn't dare. I'm not going to ask you. But I ask myself, what will move the world? And look, there are examples. Because in 2015, there was this refugee problem all over Europe. In Holland, here, we were shouting at each other. We didn't want to have a flood of strangers. They should be treated in the region. And I tried connecting, and I would say this to Aruna, but she's not here, to the World Council of Churches. I was saying, let us come together as religious leaders, as people who have come to know each other, because we are all the religions, Islam and Judaism and Christianity, but Buddhism and Hinduism and Sufism and all the others. Why don't we come from the 28 countries that at that time were Europe and come to Brussels with one subject, hospitality? And it was not in the timetable. We didn't do it. You haven't seen it. It didn't happen. And you see now, fortunately, an outpouring of solidarity, which is so warming to the heart. But we know that there are incidents with people with another color, and it pains. And it is not the good life we want, but it is something of the good life, because we open our houses, and everybody who opens the house is adding to the goodness. And in the middle of this crisis, there was one woman in Europe, Angela Merkel, who said, "Wir schaffen es." And I was in a conference in Germany a few months later in Kiel. And I could participate with others in trying to think how we could help political leadership. And then at the end of it, I mentioned Angela Merkel. And suddenly, I heard myself saying, and Angela Merkel, who has opened the doors and continued in a tradition of Willy Brandt, who went on his knees in front of the memorial in Warsaw, and President Weizsäcker, who in 1985 told the youth of Germany that they are not guilty, but they become guilty if they do not learn the history. And then I said, and after Angela Merkel made this step in courage, Deutschland ist mein geliebtes Land. I don't know. But I did it. And I reminded of the Deuteronomy of chapter 28, when it says, what you try to achieve is not far away in the ocean, beyond the ocean, and not in the heavens. It is nearby. It is beficha uvilvavcha la'asoto. It is in your mouth and in your heart. It can be done. I had to have it in my heart and speak it in my mouth. And then we all are gathered in the golden rule. And the golden rule is love your neighbor as yourself. It was another one who is my big inspiration, the Dalai Lama, who, speaking about the golden rule, said to us and said to me, to love your neighbor as yourself only can be accomplished when your neighbor also does respond. But I tell you, one day, Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, Tibetans and Chinese will embrace each other. He got up and we embraced each other. He comforted me at the beginning of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And looking at the golden rule, looking at the golden rule and living in the golden rule, there's something very particular about it. It is the middle of the sentence. The beginning of the sentence is loticon velocitor. You should not hold a grudge. You should not hate. Then you can love your neighbor as yourself. Ani Hashem. I am God who commands you. And it is so important to realize that these are parts of one sentence, and that this is the fullest, the golden rule. And so, with all these experiences, I try to present to you not a solution, but an attempt that you are working at in your conference, in your studies, in your special subjects. It is a richness which I've seen. How to bring this spiritual force, this countenance of the other, who is depending on you and you are depending on him and her. And you and I are the amplification of a whisper of love and hope. And I think for a moment in two directions. One is to declare this decade that has already started, but it is not too late, to declare this decade as a holy decade. The sacredness of time, which we all share in all spiritual traditions and in humanism, that we say this is the time, that the crisis is the greatest, because God forbid a madman or a mad regime touches the nuclear fuse. These are dangerous times because the pictures show and nobody knows, because we're living not anymore in trust, in reality, but everything is fake when it suits you. It is a time when at the one hand so much help is going to those 4 million already who are leaving, and all the others in money and sustenance. And I have not spoken about the COVID, which has cost so much. But we have seen in COVID, and Aruna speaks about it today, that only the wealthy nations and people could reach out, and so many were not helped, when we know that the virus has no boundaries. In this crisis, and a report comes today, and I have only heard the beginnings, that we are not in time to reach the potential of safeguarding the earth. in reducing our usage of fossils, in our ability to have agriculture everywhere that is sustainable. It is about sacred time. And the unification of religious leadership is one of the miracles of our time. Because for the first time in history, in the recent decades, in the organization and outside the organization, people have come forward and have said that they are convinced Zkukim echad lasheni, that we are in desperate need of each other, and that we only together, in real inner togetherness, we can reach our common goal of justice and peace. If that is true, and it is true, because people around the world are seeing the face of the other in the other religion, in Christianity and Judaism and everywhere. Why don't we bring this spiritual content to strengthen the Sustainable Development Goals to be reached by 2030, which is on the way of reducing our dependence and unifying our needs. You know, in 1992, I was in the conference, ecological conference in Rio de Janeiro. And we already talked then about all the measures that have to be taken. And it's taken Europe a long time to follow it, but it is following it now, at least in starting. But at the end of the conference, there were also together spiritual leaders and parliamentary leaders and leaders of nations, and one of them was Rio de Janeiro, who was the Prime Minister of this country for so long, and I miss him dearly. And at a press conference, Rio de Janeiro and others came to us and said, we have to discuss with you. Please, continue to make life difficult for us politicians in order that we will learn to take measures that on the short run seem to counter national self-interest, but are necessary to the preservation of the whole. And we have made attempts. We wrote the Earth Charter. We must recognize that in the magnificent diversity of cultures and life forms, we are one family, one Earth community with a common destiny. And in 2009, in a city in Switzerland, we came together. Karen Armstrong, who has been mentioned by you, one of my inspirations. It's not a secret, but in the end of May, beginning of June, in Holland, a new book of her will be published, A Sacred Nature. And I would like you already, it is in great anticipation. And she brought us together from different parts of the world. From Pakistan, from the United States, from Australia, from Europe, to sit together and write a charter for compassion. I still remember that moment that we were together and we wrote And in the middle of what he wrote is so pertinent to your studies this week. Any interpretation of Scripture which breeds hatred, violence, or disdain is illegitimate. In a speech to the Free University at one of the beginning of the theological year, I then spoke about the importance of studying this subject and taking conclusions. Here, at this very moment, the patriarch of Russia, Rio, seems to do just that. And I'm saying that, and I probably don't know if there's anybody of the press here. No. Because I met Kirill 30 years ago. And he was a passionate man for good. And I haven't given him up. But we know that the interpretation of scriptures in Christianity, in Islam, that it is such an importance. So what I'm thinking about is that there, when we were in Geneva, we gave each other a name. First it was the Council of the Wise, but we thought this is a little bit too presumptuous. And so I suggested the Council of Conscience. And we became the Council of Conscience. We are not conscious of it yet, because we never came together again. But the Charter of Compassion has compassionate cities all over the world, and it is a movement, but it is still tiny. Now is the time for a Council of Conscience, navigating good life in times of crisis, meant also that we learn to use Zoom and other communication measures. So since 2009, only a couple of days ago, we were managed to have this Council of Conscience again before the screen. And we were so happy to exchange and to share. But all of us said, this conscience, which is the conscience of every human being, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, starts with every human being is bestowed with reason and conscience. In 1948, when it was written, with the shadow of the destruction, one realized that we need conscience. And so, what would the Council of Conscience do? Well, first of all, it would be constituted of people who have earned a brittle trust. They can be in a neighborhood, they can be in a city, they can be in a country, they can also be like the Security Council. That means not the Security Council, but a council of conscience of people who speak, and at least there is a chance of reducing mistrust. The Council of Conscience can bring us to say there is now donor fatigue because of the money that we give freely, and we should, for the support of Ukraine and the crisis. There is no money for Yemen, hardly. There is much less money in all those countries that also Aruna spoke about. the violence that continues. And so, why would not every citizen give? Not because the government says so, not because it is the taxes, but because of the decision that in this decade is sacred time to give 1/1000th of one's income, year by year, to add to all the attempts that is being done. And do you know when this happens? When we reach out, we won't reach out to everyone and not be given billions and billions and billions, and maybe we get. But at least the movement of the heart, the movement of realization that we are one family, that we have to take care for each other. Would that not be a path? Because I think sometimes, if in 2015, the leaders would have been in Brussels, and people would have been touched, and movement would start. All this is already exemplified by Jewish mysticism and mysticism in many, many places. I'm looking for the first time to my watch, and I say that I'm coming almost to conclusion. Because in that story that I want to relate, it's the story of the broken vessels. It is in the Zohar, but it is also in Yitzhak Luria in the middle of the 16th century. And it is a wonderful story. And it starts about creation. Na'aseh Adam. Let us create. Oh, what happened to... have I done something wrong? No? In Na'aseh Adam, let us create the human being. And the question is, of course, why did God create the human being? He created the human being to help him with creation. Why does God need help? He decided to create. We don't know why, but he created the human being. But the power that God had was not limited to space. So this human being had to be free, able to choose between good and bad. So he had to make space for the freedom of the human being before the human being could decide. And so what did God do? And now I say kivyachol, I speak about God as if we know what God is and what God wants to do. Kivyachol means as it were. By the way, if you put it in the New Testament, which I cherish in a different way, as many maybe with you, I sometimes say that if you put kivyachol, it's so much easier to read. So God created first light, and that light was there before the sun and the moon and the stars were born on the fourth day. That was the creative light. That was the light that God used to create the whole universe. And so he took that light, the ye or of the beginning, and put it into vessels and closed the vessels. And therefore there was a complete darkness. And then he didn't tzimtzum. He withdrew completely. And there was space without God. And in that space without God, there was the beginnings of the human being. And the human being nobody could live without God. So there was this one whisper when everything seemed to crumble. And at that moment, the human being was born in the complete darkness. But what happened was There was such a power in this darkness that the vessels had broken, and the sparks of light started to dwindle, and immediately they were returned. But some of them slipped away, and more of them slipped away. And so there are those sparks of light in all the different places of the world. And what is the task of the human being? The task of the human being is to find the sparks of light, and then when they are found, they will return to the beginning, and it will be Messianic time. How can the human being find the sparks? By doing good deeds. And the good deeds are, in the eyes of God, equal. Whether it is a pat on the shoulder, or whether it is a decision of a government, whether it is a listening ear, or it is a thunderous speech. Every moment that you do a good deed, another spark is going to the source. And Abraham Yahushua Heschel, one of our great rabbis, has written that every human being, by every deed you do, or by every deed you neglect to do, you hasten or you hinder the coming of the Messianic time. And this beautiful picture of those sparks of light everywhere, see them now. See them now in all the countries of the world. I know how some of the sparks are being assembled now. When I think of Yana and Nada and Gidon, three simple names. One in Israel, one in Palestine, one in Jordan. They, 25 years ago, that was formed. I was there. What is now called Eco-Peace for the Middle East. And they continued their work in bringing together people from the different countries who are neighbors, but sometimes seem to be at war, continuous war. And the center is to purify water, to use the energy of Jordan to feed the desalination at the border with Gaza and Israel, and to make sure that everyone is able to drink pure water. And the neighborhoods are working together, and it is working small and small, and lo and behold, a few years ago they were called by the Security Council, by the then chair, you know it changes all the time, the chair was from Germany, and he asked these three people to open the session of the Security Council on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And in January, another time, another place, and they were able to present the Green-Blue Deal, which brings prosperity to everyone. And it starts with a small whip. What a spark. What a beauty. So these are also members of the Council of Conscience, whether they know it or don't know it. But they built together this Council of Conscience. And the politicians and the governments need it. I will see freely. I count on the Dutch government that they will support the Council of Conscience. Now, they won't do this because I say it here. But I know that people in the government of Holland are also perplexed about the loss of faith, about Orban, who has just won a clear majority, about all those different forces of mistrust, while the work has to be done. So I appeal to think about a new way. And I am discussing it with one of my great friends,
It is Azakaram, professor here at the Free University, Secretary General of Religions for Peace. Because, not saying that she will do it or this doesn't matter, but we are in contact. And Religions of Peace and United Religions and all other religious organizations, all of us in the spiritual traditions have a task to do what the COVID conditions have told us so loudly to do, is to collaborate, to work together. And we know that we are as fallible in our interfaith organizations and faith organizations as the politicians are. Some of the politicians may have more spirituality than some of us, or maybe myself. I don't know. Nobody owns the ownership. But it is so important that this Council of Conscience doesn't take an important place because it sits in an important building in an important organization, but because it is a place where some of this spiritual fervor, some of this goodness, some of this consciousness that we are God's image will be present. The clock ticks. We enter. We are in sacred time. Bertolt Brecht wrote in 1938 to posterity. He says there, we live in dark times when even speaking about trees seems to be a treason to people who are in hungry and in fear. And he ends, you who will live beyond me and beyond us. You will live in a time when people are helping each other. And when you are, think in compassion about us. And my father, blessed memory, he wrote in pieces of paper that were a kind of book for a boy who was in hiding, not far from him, but not reachable, and had to prepare for a bar mitzvah at 13 years, but couldn't. And the book and the pieces of paper, my father had never told me. The boy survived, and he took the piece of paper to the United States, and they are now in the Washington Museum, the Holocaust Museum. And I was able to read the lines. And in the middle of it he writes, Na'aseh Adam, let us create the human being. My young friend, know that God has given us the task to perfect creation in the way God wants it to be. A world filled with cooperation, love, truth, and righteousness. May these words be our guide, not only, but certainly in times of crisis.
Hebben we nog een beetje tijd? Nog wat tijd? So, Awraham, just stay here because there may be some questions. Well, thank you very, very much for your beautiful, inspiring speech. You took us to so many places, from Mokum to India to Babi Yar, then and now, and again to Mokum, and to Louvain, and you spoke about so many people, from the dock worker to Ed van Tijn and Martin Luther King and Angela Merkel, Dalai Lama, so many aspects, and they all came together, I think, in the end, in your call for cooperation. So I'm sure there must be some people who have questions. It's getting late, but if you still want to ask something, it's possible. Also for the people online, I think they can write questions in the chat. So, and then I guess they will be presented to you. So is there anybody who feels like another question? As if he didn't give all the answers yet, but still. The microphone can come around. Well, I think so, right? Okay. You're all like overwhelmed. Maybe I have like a question. It's probably difficult to answer, but you spoke about Putin. You called him the new pharaoh, and this time coming like up to Pesach, you know, this is a very meaningful and scary thought, actually. But you also spoke about the Nazi who looked into your eyes and who softened up in this way. How do you think this, like, council of conscience, for example, could reach somebody like Putin and make him change his mind, let's say?
Well, first of all, I say I don't believe in the devil. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in the angel. I believe that Russia is indispensable in reaching world peace. I think that the Russian citizens should never be forgotten and be isolated. I know that the President of the United States called him a criminal, and the question is, in history, there are patterns, and in the Bible. I'm thinking of the king Balak of Moab, and it says that the king of Moab, Balak, called on a non-Jewish prophet who had the power about cursing and blessing, and he asked him to curse the people because he felt threatened by their presence. And we know the story that in the end, the curse became a blessing. And words from the curse that become the blessing are Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. How good, how your tents, Israel, your dwelling places, Israel. And the question that the commentators ask is, why did Balak ask Balaam, who had the power of blessing and curse, why didn't he ask him to bless his people so that they wouldn't feel a threat? As the threat was not a real threat, but in their view. And the answer is because Balak hated the Israelites more than he loved his people. I'm thinking often about this commentary when I see how Putin is behaving. That I'm not excluding any possibility. And I am now doing again something difficult because there is a confidence, but you realize that also in Holland, many people are thinking, how can we move the Russian Orthodox Church? How can we reach them? And so there is an idea. And let me so that I can share it with you, because it's only an idea. And we don't know. We don't know. But why can't you discuss it? On a particular moment, because we are coming now in a time which is already sacred. Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak to people who observe Ramadan, but also for us who are not observing, it's important. And in a few days later, in about 2 weeks, there will be Pesach. And then there will be Easter. And then there will be a different Easter for the Russian Orthodox Church. So in these times, we are thinking of, would it be possible to have a human chain? That means that at a certain moment, people will stand together, silent or in prayer, and would start somewhere, and then spread to another city, and another city, and then go worldwide. And then the new Pharaoh, we don't know. Now, when I say this, is you think about it. Is that a model? Is that something that come? If you have ideas, please send them to you, to me, because I was going to name a person, but that is also difficult because then I compromise. I don't know why I have to be that way, but I do it in confidence because it has brought to me in confidence. But as we have to decide by Thursday. We have to decide by Thursday. So it will be on a day just before that Easter. I have been in a human chain here in Amsterdam some years ago when, I say it like in the past, when there was sometimes intolerance in the country. We didn't know, but we had this human chain and thousands of people came. And we went from a chain, from a church, I thought it was, no, the church was in the south, and we had a mosque, and we had a synagogue. And I remember the wethouder, the counselor, who embraced us and said, so good. You never know if it reacts. I think it will be a very, very difficult, but none of us is eternal. And we say, and we know, that every one of us, you and me, we are human beings. And before us, in the whole of history, there was never anyone similar to us completely. And after our death, hopefully in long life, there will be never anybody like us. And what we leave is a legacy. And I think maybe Vladimir Putin at night may think of his legacy. I know another one, and it seems to be very, very strange. Is Mikhail Gorbachev, who shared with me and others that he was sitting at night when there was an uprising in Poland with Valenza. And he said that night all the maps were on the table and all the letters of the general staff. And they all said, send tanks to Russia. You end the rebellion. For 3 months you will have problems, because in the West and everybody sanctions, etc. But then everybody has forgotten it. And the independence of Poland doesn't get a chance. And he said, you know, I never believed in God. I don't have belief there. A little bit Spinoza. My wife knows a lot about Spinoza. And I don't know if his wife has quoted to him a passage from the Ethica, the passage that I take to sleep. And the passage says something, if a person led by reason wants to realize his, or he doesn't say her happiness, but that's 17th century, his happiness, he must also try to reach the happiness of the other, and thus become dignified and righteous. I don't know if she quoted it, but Gorbachev said, she went to sleep, but I was not alone. There was destiny. And I wrote, No Thanks to Warsaw, which changed history. Vladimir Putin can change history, but he doesn't know it. So, will it move the heart of Kirill? Will it move? But at least it will show solidarity also with the many, many, many people in Russia who don't want violent change, but want change. And so, I don't know, but we say spiritually, when you pray, when you move words, when you have your will, it moves mountains. When we start, we don't know. But whatever it is that people of goodwill do, it works over time. But we hope it works now.
Thank you. We'll see what we can do this week. And let's hope, and some of this will come through. I think it's time to conclude this night, right? Or is there still somebody with another question or remark? Yeah, oh, Helene, yes?
Thank you. In the afternoon, in the discussion after Aruna's speech, there was also the comment how important it is to put the victim in the center of all discussion and conversation. And this crosses my mind now. We are talking so much about Kirill and Putin and Russia. So this attention is great, but why look at the new pharaoh and not hearing the victims first? So why approaching Kirill, and why not listening to the religious communities in Ukraine first? Well, and they are there, and we hardly do know anything about them in Western Europe.
You are completely right, and I was only taken by the question about Putin, because, and this is the importance, but you of course are right, it's about the religions together, about the voice, about my impatience with the collective interfaith experience, which is so magnificent. And, I have been moved in my life by people from different spiritual traditions, sometimes more than of my own. And that is new, and that is so strong, and it will be heard. And you are also right, it reminds me of something that is very important, but I didn't come to speak about, because we speak about Yemen, and about, I think 2018, we were all receiving, if we had the NSA paper. In the front page, there was a picture of an emancipated child in Yemen. This is the disaster, the human tragedy, which is still now, although there is now some ceasefire, maybe. And I was moved by this picture, and others were moved by the picture. And we came together as spiritual leaders and traditions, and in the Peace Palace, we had close to the 1st of January. Between Christmas and the 1st of January, you realize nobody goes on protest or something, but why you came. And we were there, and there was one speaker, and she came from Yemen and had addressed the United Nations, a young woman. And she came to me, I didn't know her, and she said, "Thank you for organizing this." And I said, "No, you don't have to thank. This is the least we can do." And then suddenly she said to me, "Don't think of us only as victims. We are establishing new alliances. We have power and strength. And one day, please God, we in Yemen will become a source of hope for the world." And of course I said to her, "Can I quote you? Because will you speak?" And she spoke. And I quoted her. And I'm thinking of her and the people we call victims and the inner strength. So yes, if what we are doing as solidarity can give a courage to people who at the moment don't have a voice, and the church, and so it's so difficult when I'm in an audience, but sometimes I feel we have become together and that I can divulge more. It is not important, but let me say, and I'm thinking also of the article that you wrote, that people in Russia and people in Ukraine, in fact, are sometimes part of the same church. And there are terrible divisions, and reaching out with it dangerous because of the laws and regulations that now reign. So it is important that when you take the two questions together, that we do, whether it is this human chain or ringing bells in the churches or something else that is here and starts in Europe, a kind of reaching out to those ordinary citizens, and at the same time maybe reaching out that in our voice there is a voice of peace. I have to admit to you that I sometimes write letters together with others, but I always say personal letters are very important. And then I look at my letter and it's so peaceful. It's so peaceful. I said, yes, almost. No. It's so peaceful. It's so peaceful. And one more.
You can also just stand here.
One more, which I want to share, therefore, of leaders. I mentioned Willy Brandt, who was Chancellor of Germany. And in 1970, and you were not born then, but many of you, but he came and he fell on his knees. And that picture went all over the world. And that
following out the needs of Willy Brandt, who had been in the resistance during the war as a young man, but who did not say, I am completely excluded from everything that happened, helped the restoration of East and West. And I had an occasion in Washington. It was the Albert Einstein Foundation was giving a medal and significant to Willy Brandt, who was, of course, not anymore Chancellor, etc. And I was honored to give the introduction prayer. So I was standing next to Willy Brandt, and I said to him, there is something I want to say to you. But when I say it to you, when I put my question to you, you will be very angry at me. So he said, Rabbi, how can I be angry? And you asked the question. And I said, well, when you came into the square of the center of Warsaw and approached the monument, had you in your mind already the thought to fall on your knees? And he became angry. He said, how can you think a thing like this? I said, sorry, I told you would get it. He said, I had no notion. I went there and there it happened. Well, this is a challenge in the spiritual world as it is in the active world. Because I speak in what I wanted to say in the amplification of the whisper. This is exactly it. There was a moment of inspiration, of reflection, which made Willy Brandt do this, and the effect that it had. Because he was Willy Brandt, because of his background, because of the people who knew, who respected him. But we never know. We never know in our world. Even this is picked up by something which we don't call very clean. That is other media, Twitter, and all the other names. When suddenly there is something out of the extraordinary, and even if it is done by a few people, an embrace by a Palestinian woman who lost her son, and a Palestinian father who lost his daughter in the violence. And they embrace each other. You know something? They do. The parent circle exists. People who have suffered so heavily, and together they now go for peace. Such an embrace can suddenly bring light into the world. So yes, power of the powerless and the powerlessness of power. The possibility is there. Thank you, and thank you for asking the questions.
Thank you for addressing us. So I think now it's really time to conclude, right? Is there still anybody who wants to say anything, or is this something for tomorrow, or no? Okay, so then, thanks again, and watch, be careful. Good, it went good. So.